Hi, my name is Angel. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about all of the worst and most disappointing reads that I've had for the year of 2024. So this video is going to be broken up into three different parts. So first I'm going to talk about like the worst of the worst, my lowest ratings books that I generally wouldn't recommend to other people because I don't think that they're really good books. And then we're going to get into my most disappointing, starting with things that I feel like were hyped up by other people or things that I was enjoying and then unfortunately resulted in a lower rating. And then the second part of my most disappointing section is going to be books that I personally hyped up for myself and then gave a lower rating than I expected. One quick thing before we get into the video, I just want to apologize in advance if you do hear children screaming in the background. It's winter break and our building at my apartments is like the hot spot for children around here and it's really frustrating. So if it annoys you, just remember that I have to sit here and listen to it all day. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my worst books of 2024. I want to start off strong with all of my 1 stars, so the absolute worst of the worst. Up first is The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry, which I was really excited for because Christina Henry is an author that I've enjoyed in the past, but I feel like this book was so boring and there was like no build up to any of the horror. There was no tension, there was no fear or anticipation or suspense or like anything that you want to feel when you go into a horror book. None of that was there. Everything, like, it was just boring, to be quite honest. And then you get to the end and the resolution and everything that happens at the end was just so dumb, and once again there was no build up, so it was like it just kind of came out of nowhere and then the book ended and I was like, what is the point of this? Like, I just read 200 something pages for nothing. My next 1 star was Cold People by Tom Rob Smith, which I did read in a reading vlog and I kind of went on a little bit of a rant in that video, and I also typed up a very long Goodreads review if you really want to know in depth. But this book essentially, like, it didn't make any sense. This is like an apocalyptic book where aliens come down and they tell everybody on Earth that they have to go to Antarctica or something, and that's the only space that they're able to live. But there were so many plot holes and just so many things that didn't make sense. There was characters that I didn't really care about, and overall I was just like, it was just a really dumb book. Hate to say it, hope I don't sound ridiculous, but it was. The other 1 star that I had was My Killer Vacation by Tessa Bailey, which I was excited for. I'm not a really big romance reader, but I was like, this is a girl gets with a bounty hunter because when they go on vacation they find a dead body and it's supposed to be very steamy, and I'm not like a really big fan of very steamy things to begin with, but I have read from Tessa Bailey before, so I kind of knew what to expect. But this one, like, my big issue in here was the male main character. I felt like he was rude, and the way that he was described physically did not seem attractive at all to me. Like, in my head, I pictured this man to be so ugly, and then he was just like not a nice person to our female main character, and some of the conversations in here about sex and presenting yourself and the way that our female main character presents herself and the things that our male main character had to say about that, it just like put such a bad taste in my mouth. It was a very unpleasant read, and I knew that pretty early on, but I just finished the book to hate read it. This was not good. Would not recommend this to anybody. If you're looking for a romance, there are far better things that you can pick up and read than this piece of trash. That is all of my 1 stars. This next book was technically 1.5 stars because I feel like it was slightly above a 1 star, but it was still pretty bad, and this is Lakewood by Megan Giddings, which I'm really sad about, and I feel like I have to say this because anytime, like, you say an opinion on the internet, people are going to say bad things to you, and I experienced this when I read, was it last year? I read 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good, and hated it because it was horribly written, and I had people saying that, like, I was wrong because it deals with important topics. So I do just want to address that with Liquid, because there is a lot of important commentary that the author does bring up, and is the goal of the story talking about racism. My feelings towards the book are not my feelings towards the commentary and the message that the book is trying to get across. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. This book, on 2 separate occasions, I fell asleep while reading it, which is not something that I ever do. But there were literally 2 separate points with this one specific book where I just like was reading it fully, like fell asleep in the middle of a sentence and then woke up and I was like, oh yeah, I was reading this book. Like, it was just, I feel like it was so boring. That's really all I'm gonna say about it. And I was really excited for a lot of the themes, like the medical horror. I love social commentary in horror, and it just did not deliver at all. I didn't find the horror to be thrilling or exciting at all, and I didn't have a good time. Okay, I'm gonna try to speed run some of these. The next one is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, which I didn't like because I feel like the author set out to do this retelling, almost a retelling of the Ted Bundy murders, but from the victim's perspective, and her goal was to bring that attention back to the victims and away from Ted Bundy, which I do agree and I do believe is a good sentiment, but I feel like the author just completely butchered it because she changed so many details from the real story, made up things that didn't really happen, and then still put so much focus on the killer in the book that it just, she set out to have this great message and to do this great thing, but it just flopped. Next is The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell, which is a sequel to The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. Simply put, I don't think this book needed to exist, and there was an entire third of the book that was dedicated to this one perspective and this one storyline of something that literally happened in the first book. And so there was no reason for it to be drawn out over another 300 pages in a second book. But I think she just added that in there as filler because without that, there wasn't enough substance to create a second book. And I feel like that is why it just shouldn't have existed in the first place. I'll say the same thing about Reckless by Lauren Roberts, which is the sequel to Powerless by Lauren Roberts, which is not a book that I really loved to begin with, but I wanted to continue in the series. I still will continue in the series. Reckless is like the embodiment of a filler book. Like, literally nothing happens in the book, and then at the very end, they set up for the next book. Also, at the very end, I see so many people that say the same thing about this. They're like, oh, nothing really happens, but like the plot twist at the end like really shocked me, and that's why I give this like 4 stars or whatever. But I feel like maybe I'm the only one because I've not seen anybody else say this, but like I feel like it was very predictable what was going to happen at the end. Like, I literally was reading it and I was like, oh, this is how it's gonna end. And then that's how it ended. And I was like, what was the point of this book? Literally, if you just like took that last chapter and published that on its own, that would have been pretty much the same thing as reading the entire book because nothing else happened. Next is Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which I don't really have a lot to say about this except I just didn't really enjoy it. It was boring. The horror wasn't there. And there's also this like romance between these characters that I feel like was very forced, and I just don't understand why it was happening or why these people were even friends to begin with because they were so like mean to each other, and the way that they talked about the other person behind their back was like just not positive. I just don't understand why it was there, and I was already bored throughout the book, so that was kind of like the cherry on top of unenjoyment. Next is Supplication by Noor Abi Nikul, which I will also group in with this other one, The Woods Are Waiting by Catherine Green, because these are 2 books that I didn't enjoy, but thinking back now, I really don't remember them that much. Supplication I do remember a little bit because I remember enjoying it at the very beginning, and it was very hallucinatory and like fever dreamy, and it was about this woman who, maybe I don't remember this one that well. I remember like the vibes of it and like the imagery that I had in my head while I was reading it, but after the very beginning I despised this book because it was just like too much. And I know that's gonna sound really dumb, but that's just how I feel about it. The Woods Are Waiting is a thriller book that I just don't really remember, and I think there were dumb characters and a really dumb reveal. Moving on to Where the Dead Wait by Allie Wilkes, which is a book that I also read for a reading vlog. This is like a polar gothic horror book about an Arctic expedition, and I had very, very high hopes because I thought it was going to be so cool and so atmospheric, and I was just really excited to read something that took place in the Arctic like this, but it jumped around a lot within the timeline, and it was just overall very, very confusing, and I just didn't really end up enjoying it. Next is The Drift by CJ Tudor, which, to put it simply, is I feel like a book where there were too many elements stuffed into here that it just kind of all became very muddy and, once again, confusing and unenjoyable and kind of dumb. Haunt Sweet Home by Sarah Pinsker is another one that I also feel like was just kind of dumb. It just wasn't a good book. I read this one for a vlog as well where I talk about it a little bit more, but it just felt so silly, and I feel like this is a good book for like a middle schooler, but it's not marketed as a book for a middle schooler. This is an adult horror book, and the horror was lacking, the characters were lacking, the messaging was very, very simplistic and very, very cheesy. And the last one is You Should Have Left by Daniel Kelman, which, simply put, I feel like nothing really happened in this book and I didn't really gain anything from reading it, and I will never think about it again. It really works for a lot of people that want like that abstract haunted house story, and I'm very happy for those that it works for, but for me, I was like, this is kind of pointless. Now we are into section 2 of the video where I'm talking about my most disappointing books. So these are disappointing for a variety of reasons, which I will touch upon. My first one is A Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. This is mostly disappointing because it was on my TBR, and then I ended up reading a different book by this author and loving it and giving it 5 stars, and then realizing that this one was on my TBR, so I was like, oh my god, I need to read this because I'm gonna love it so much. It was a sci-fi book, and it was about first contact and developing communication with these super intelligent octopuses, but there weren't enough octopuses in the book, and I feel like it was just really boring. And there was also this one perspective that you're reading from, but that perspective isn't really important until the very end of the book, so like for the entire rest of the book you're just like, why am I reading from this person's perspective? This is a very well loved one. A lot of people enjoy this, and I'm very happy for you guys, but for me, like, this just didn't work at all. I wanted more octopus. Next is Ritualistic Human Sacrifice by C.B. Hunt, which is another one that I've had my eye on for a while before picking it up, and this one's disappointing because I loved the first half of this book. Like, I felt like it was on track to be 4 or 5 stars, and then about the halfway point, the last half just went a totally opposite direction of what I was hoping for, and it just was not enjoyable at all. So it was really, really upsetting that I loved so much of it, but then hated the rest of it. Next is Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. I got this as an ARC, and I initially gave it 3 stars, and then the more that I thought about it, I bumped my rating down to 2.5 stars. I just didn't really like this one. I feel like the narration style, we're reading from the perspective of, I think she's like 8 years old, and that just didn't really work for me because I feel like I was never fully drawn into the story, and then it also led to so many things being simplistic and also repetitive throughout the story, where it was like the same things over and over and over and over and over again because you're reading from the mind of a child. And this is one of those that everybody's loving. Like, this book just got published and people are eating it up. I'm seeing so many 5-star reviews. I'm seeing so many recommendations for this book, and I feel like I'm crazy for not enjoying it. Like, I'm definitely in the minority of this one, but I feel like people are hyping it way too much, and it's just not that good. I also felt this way with Daphne by Josh Malerman because I gave that one 2 stars, but I feel like people really, really loved that one. But then A House at the Bottom of the Lake, I really, really loved, but people don't like that one. So I think I just need to read some more Josh Malerman and really figure out what I do enjoy from him and what I don't. And it's just one of those authors that I feel like gets hyped up a lot, even though there's nothing very particularly special about the books. Next is The Last One by Will Dean, and I'll also include here The One by John Mars because these are both thriller books that were hyped up over the years as being very shocking, very twisty, and just very intriguing. And I feel like intriguing, yes, they both were, but they were also both very dumb and had a lot of plot holes, and I just feel like were maybe a little bit overhyped. But I guess I would still recommend these. Like, if you want a thriller that you really have to suspend your disbelief and know that these things aren't realistic and that is silly and over the top and a little bit dramatic, then maybe you would enjoy these if that's something that you enjoy reading. But for me, generally, that's not the type of thrillers that I seek out, and I feel like I just got duped by the internet on these. Next is Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina. I read Nick Medina's other book, which is called Indian Burial Ground, which was published after Sisters of the Lost Nation, but takes place on the same reservation in the same world. So the idea is you read Sisters of the Lost Nation and you enjoy that one, and maybe you go on to read Indian Burial Ground, which is a different story within the same community. I was backwards, but I really enjoyed Indian Burial Ground, so I was like, okay, well now I have to read Sisters of the Lost Nation, but I didn't enjoy that one. I feel like the atmosphere was not painted very well. I think in Indian Burial Ground, like, it was very atmospheric. I could picture all of the characters, I could picture the reservation, I could picture everything that was going on. But Sisters of the Lost Nation, that imagery wasn't there, and I only had it because I had read Indian Burial Ground previously. I also feel like the story wasn't very, very strong in Sisters of the Lost Nation, but once again does deal with a lot of important topics, and I do appreciate the commentary and the message that the author was putting out. My feelings towards the book are not my feelings towards the commentary. The next two on this list are books that I have read from the authors before and really, really loved what they put out before, and then I picked up their newer release and was really let down. So we have Your Utopia by Bora Chung, which is a short story collection. Bora Chung is the author of Cursed Bunny, which is another short story collection that I enjoyed. And then the next one is Private Rights by Julia Armfield, who is the author of Our Wives Under the Sea, which I enjoyed. Private Rights I found to be boring, and really that's a big word that I'm saying this video, boring. It's just unfortunate that I love these authors before and their newer books didn't work for me, but I will still pick up from them in the future, and third time's the charm. We'll see if we love it or hate it. Lastly, I just have a short list of books that were personal disappointments for me. So these didn't necessarily have low ratings. I think they were all between 3 and 3.5 stars, which is a perfectly fine rating. But these are books that I personally hyped up for myself and was like, this is gonna be a new favorite. This is gonna be a 5-star book for me. And then it wasn't, and so I just felt a little bit let down. But overall, they weren't the worst books ever. Starting off with The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. This is one that started on Reddit, and that was one of the big reasons why I was really excited to read this one. I was a very avid connoisseur of the No Sleep subreddit. Back in the day, I used to read those stories all the time, so anything that has started on there and has been published into a book, I always get really excited for. For example, Pen Pal was one that I did enjoy that also started on Reddit, but this one, I just feel like there were things that I enjoyed about it, but overall in the ending, it just wasn't my favorite, and I feel like it felt very average to me. Next is Baby X by Kira Peikoff. I'm not really sure how to say her last name. This is a new release. This is a sci-fi book, and I feel like the world and a lot of the concepts in the world that we're in throughout the book are really, really fascinating, but the storyline that the book is following is really lame and it has a lot of plot holes. But I feel like the author came up with so many interesting concepts for this futuristic, weird, dystopian world, and I would have liked so many of those other things explored rather than the storyline that we're following. Also, the way that the author chose to tell the book with the different perspectives we're following makes it easy to figure out what the plot twist is, because there's one perspective that we're following that doesn't connect to the other ones, so I feel like you use your brain a little bit and then you'll figure out why it connects to the other ones, but that is supposed to be like a big reveal at the end. So I really liked some of the concepts in here, but I didn't like the author's execution and the way that she chose to tell the story. Next is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim, which is a new release that once again is getting a lot of hype around the internet. I see 4-star, 5-star reviews, a lot of recommendations for it. I feel like there were a lot of plot holes, and that's really the main issue that I had with this one. There was a lot of great gore and horror, and there was a lot of family relationships and a lot of interpersonal relationships throughout the story, and a lot of trauma and a lot of touch on racism and commentary that I did enjoy. But in the end, I just wasn't a really big fan of the story as a whole, and once again, I feel like the ending, it was rushed, first of all, and then because it was rushed, it led to a lot of different plot holes that I feel like nobody's really talking about online. Next is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister, which is another very, very hyped up thriller that I found to be very average. I thought it was interesting and very intriguing in the beginning, and the plot was really, really interesting, but the story itself kind of felt very, very average. I think this is a case of a book that the plot is really, really intriguing to a lot of people, like where this woman has to go back into the past and she is trying to solve a crime that hasn't yet happened. And it is fascinating, but like the way the story's told, I feel like was very mediocre. Next, please don't kill me for saying this. This is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is my first book by this author, although I do want to read some of her other things. This is a dystopian world. It starts off in the year of 2024, I believe, so that's why I thought it was really fun to read during this year. I think this is a really good apocalyptic story. It's kind of scary at times because it's very similar to, I think, the direction of the current world that we're in and the current society we're in, where it's headed. I think it's a really important read, and I think it has been around and been loved for so long for a lot of really good reasons, but overall for me, I just felt like it was very, very average, and there were a lot of things that I didn't enjoy about this. And last but not least is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I read The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston this year, and I really loved it. It was a 5-star romance for me, which is a little bit rare, and so I wanted to read The Dead Romantics because obviously being on the internet, in all of the different spaces it's been on the internet, people really hyped this one up, but I feel like it was very average. There wasn't a lot of really compelling things, and I feel like the romance was very poorly developed and a little bit rushed as well. I just didn't see the chemistry between the two characters, and I wasn't rooting for their relationship, although it was an interesting concept of this man being a ghost, and I liked following our main character and her personal growth throughout the story. But I also feel like you can definitely tell that Ashley Poston's writing is growing and changing for the better. Having read The 7-Year Slip first and then going back to read The Dead Romantics, I think there was a big difference in the two, and although I didn't entirely hate this one, I just think as a romance it really wasn't that strong. And that brings us to the end of the video. So these were all of my worst books and all of my most disappointing books for 2024. Let me know if you guys share any similar opinions. Also let me know if you disagree, but I just ask that you be respectful because I am a person, okay? And if you're not a fan of negativity, don't worry because my best books list will be coming out pretty soon as well, so you'll have something to look forward to. With all of that being said, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys next time.